Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. So we're headed into uh, chapter 6. Chapter 6 is about learning. So what I'm going to do, again, like always, share the screen so you guys can see what I'm talking about. There we go. All right. So again, of course, if you guys have any questions, let me know. And you know how to reach me. So email me all you want. I will answer as soon as I can. Okay. So here we go. Learning. So the theory of learning says, or the definition of learning is, it's basic. Learning is just a systematic, relatively permanent change in behavior that occurs through experience. And that experience is through behaviorism, through associative learning and conditioning, and then observational learning. Behaviorism is just repeating one pattern, repeating patterns, behaviors, repeating behaviors. Associative learning is learning by association or conditioning, conditioning your body to do something, conditioning your brain to do something, and then observation is just watching other people do it. You guys have, I don't know, maybe you have, maybe you haven't, but classical conditioning and operant conditioning, most people are more familiar with classical conditioning because that's Pavlov's dog. And basically what that is classical conditioning is pairing two things to create a response. So creating one introducing one thing and then a second thing, which creates a response. Operant conditioning is a little easier to understand. Basically, it's a behavior and a consequence. You do well, you get rewards. Classical conditioning is like the doctor's office and the shot. Okay, so we know that, most of the time doctor's offices are okay, but when kids are little, they have to have shots. So they, when you go to the doctor's office, they're afraid they're going to get a shot. So what's going to happen is they start to cry. So in the beginning, in the doctor's office, nothing happens. When they get a shot, they cry. So when they start to realize that every time they go to the doctor's office, they get a shot, they're going to cry. So it starts that, anytime they walk into the doctor's office, they're going to cry, right? Operant conditioning helps explain voluntary behavior. And then understanding that behavior has consequences, whether it's a positive consequence, but then it's also negative consequences as well. The classical conditioning helps see involuntary behavior, or helps explain involuntary behavior, like crying with the doctor's office. And then the control of the fear is shifted to a new stimulus. So fear is not just the fear of the shot. Fear now becomes associated with the doctor's office. So again, they start to cry as soon as they walk into the doctor's office. Now here's a breakdown of Pavlov's dog. So couple of things here. US is the unconditioned stimulus and the unconditioned response. Just like humans, when you give us food, we start to react to that food. Okay. All right. So, and then the neutral stimulus, and then has no response. We hear a dog hears a bell. We hear a bell. It doesn't mean anything, so nothing happens. Conditioning means that they're going to pair the bell with the food, so that the food and the bell mean the same thing. So pairing the bell with the food creates the response. The unconditioned response and the conditioned response are the same. What you're doing is you're just conditioning the person, or here the dog, to react to the bell instead of the food. So the classical conditioning of the dog was pretty much like what we see happen when we feed our own animals. It doesn't take them long to understand that when we open the food pantry or the food cabinet or wherever their food is, they come running. So, my cats realize that when I clean the litter box, it's time to eat. So I start cleaning the litter box, and, I look up and they're both sitting there staring at me going, okay, where's my dinner, right? So same thing. Operant conditioning, voluntary behaviors. So the consequences of behaviors change the probability of that behavior's occurrence. So that consequence can either be a positive consequence or a negative consequence. Here, if she knows that if she does well, she can, with raising her food, and she can get a first prize. So if I do things well, this is what you guys, then you get rewards for that. You guys have learned that through your grades. If you do well on exams, if you do well on homework, then you get that good grade. And so same thing. It's because it's we it's that internal consequence that we enjoy, the internal reward. Maybe when we were little, we got allowance for a good grade or whatever, so we wanted to continue that behavior. Now, when we talk about responses and stimuli, the whole point behind any sort of stimuli is to reinforce behavior. We either want, we want good behavior to continue, or we want bad behavior to stop. Okay. So any type of reinforcement is going to increase a behavior. Now, positive reinforcement. Okay. So here, when we think of, we're going to talk about positive and negative. When we talk about positive, that doesn't mean good. Positive here means to add. Negative will mean to take away. So that's when we talk about positive and negative stuff, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about good versus bad. We're talking about giving versus taking. So positive reinforcement, behavior is followed by a rewarding consequence. Babies learning to walk. When they start to walk, we get all excited. Yay, good job. And so babies learn to feed on that. And so the rewarded stimulus is added. So therefore, they're going to want to walk more because they want that yay response. Okay, so versus negative reinforcement, behaviors followed by rewarding consequence. However, it's a bad thing being removed. So negative reinforcement here is she has a headache, okay, which is the unpleasant stimulus. Behavior is her taking medication. So by her taking medication, the headache is removed, and that's negative reinforcement. So again, reinforcement, something is rewarded, but positive reinforcement is when something is added. Negative reinforcement when something is taken away or removed. Now, different type of reinforcers work for different types of people. Not everybody's going to respond to the same thing. Primary reinforcers tend to be things like food, things that are innately satisfying. We don't have to be taught to like food. Now we have to be taught to like, sometimes we have to be taught to like certain foods. But in and of itself, food tends to be an innately satisfying reinforcer because we don't have to be taught to be hungry. We don't have to be taught to eat. We are born knowing how to eat. Now, on the flip side of that is the secondary reinforcers. They become satisfying through experience, things like good grades, a repeated association with a pre-existing reinforcer, meaning food and money for good grades. You get a good grade. When report cards come in, if you get all A's, we'll go out to eat, and you'll get $5 for an A, $4 for a B, or whatever. So that money becomes a secondary reinforcer simply because it's paired with food, a lot of, well, I don't know about a lot, but I know some elementary school teachers use what they call a token economy, basically, but it can work a couple of different ways. It can work by, for every task, like some teachers will have that task table or that task, sheet on the wall. And, for every task you do, you get a star. And at the end of the week, depending on how many stars you have, will allow for certain rewards. Teachers can use tokens They don't necessarily have to be, real money tokens, but they can be like tickets. And for everything you do, you get a ticket, and at the end of the week, you can trade those tickets in for like some teachers will have like treasure chests, and so you can trade your tickets in for treasure chest, or you can turn your gold stars into something out of the treasure chest. So different types of behavior. We want to, different types of there are different types of reinforced behavior. You know, basically here you want the dog here is responding to similar stimuli, basically meaning, there's not going to be a difference between the way they react to a treat, or the way they react to their food, or their, like their, when you've set out, because my cats, they have dry food every day, but they only get wet food 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then every now and then they'll get a special little treat. So, but they don't act any differently towards the treat than they do the wet food. So it's a generalization of this is something special food. Now, whether it's a treat or whether it's the wet food, it doesn't matter. But it's a generalized, generalized behavior, all right, or a generalized stimulus. Discrimination, stimuli signal when behavior will or will not be reinforced. So understand that, like when you're trying to train a dog to do, or, to behave, if you say sit and they sit, then they're going to get rewarded. But if you say sit and they don't sit, then they're not going to get rewarded. So they learn to discriminate between what is rewardable behavior and what is not rewardable behavior. What happens eventually, and if we go back to Pavlov's dog, he was taught that the bell paired with the food, and then he starts to drool. Okay, so that was the response. The response was the drooling. So as long as the bell is continuously paired with the food, then the dog will continue to drool. Eventually, at the sound of the bell, he'll start to drool simply because he understands that the food is coming next. So the bell for a short time will cause the drooling to start. However, if at some point the food doesn't come after the bell, it's simply the bell, then what will happen was the drooling behavior will decrease because that reinforcement is stopped. So, things never, you can't really unlearn anything. It's just that behavior tends to lessen over time. There are different types of reinforcement, or different schedules of reinforcement, excuse me. That continuous reinforcement, kids get that in the beginning when they're, potty training, that continuous reinforcement. Every time they go to the bathroom, they get excited. After that becomes what they call partial reinforcement. So you've got fixed. Okay. Fixed reinforcement was after every certain thing. Variable, that's our slot machines. It happens when it happens. Maybe it's after a certain time, after a certain number. Ratio, for every 3 things, then you'll get, for every 3 good behaviors, then you'll get 1 reward. And then interval, it's fixed and variable has to do more with the amount of time something happens. Ratio versus interval has more to do with the amount of time that passes. For every 3 minutes, every 2 minutes, interval happens, at certain intervals. It's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so here we go, even better. So fixed ratio, okay, is fixed ratio reinforcement follows a set number of behaviors. So ratio, right? Variable ratio is your slot machine. Okay, so wait a minute, let's back up here. Okay, so forget what I said about this. These are just types of reinforcement. So fixed, variable, ratio, and interval. So I got a little ahead of myself here and then confused myself. So fixed ratio, after a set number of behaviors. Variable ratio, an unpredictable number of behaviors, or an average. Fixed interval, so set amount of time, right? And then variable interval, unpredictable amount of time has elapsed. Okay, so fixed meaning specific, variable meaning obviously varied or unpredictable. Interval is time, whereas ratio is things. So there we go. So here's some really good examples of, fixed interval versus fixed ratio. Punishment, okay, is designed to decrease behavior. Now, again, positive and negative going back to adding and taking away, not good versus bad. So positive punishment is unpleasant is added. Some people use spanking. Some people use timeout. Okay, same thing. Here, a negative punishment is the rewarding stimulus is removed. So if kids are sitting, I used to, when my kids were little, we would go to, Kilwins down in St. Augustine, or when we would go down to St. Augustine, we would go to Kilwins. And if they were acting up while we were down there and weren't behaving, I would take the ice cream because, the ice cream was a reward. That was just, it was something fun we did while we were down there, because who can't go to St. Augustine and walk up and down St. George Street without smelling the amazing waffle cones, right? So if the kids were acting ugly, then I would take away that ice cream, right? So punishment or positive punishment is adding something unpleasant. Whether it's, you were late to class, run laps. My kids are in, or my daughter's in martial arts. And when she's late, she has to run laps by herself. So what that does is create an environment where everybody's like, well, I don't want to run by myself, so I'm going to get there on time, right? So behaviors followed by that bad or that negative behavior, or that undesired behavior is followed by adding a punishment. Whereas the negative punishment is taking punishment away. So it's not good or bad, it's plus or minus. Operant conditioning, okay, immediate versus delayed reinforcement, immediate versus delayed punishment. When kiddos are when kiddos are younger, immediate is better, because what happens is anything that happens between either what they did that was good or what they did that was not good, any time lapse in between, and they may forget what that reward or that punishment is, and they may wind up associating the reward with something that's incorrect, or the punishment with something that's incorrect. So with little kids, consequences need to follow up pretty quick. However, when you're older, delay is okay, because you guys know that, every 12 weeks, you guys are going to get grades, or 15 weeks. You guys are going to get grades. So at the end of the semester, you're going to get your report card or grades, final grades, right? So that's a delay. I mean, you see little bits along the way, but that delayed reinforcement, or that, comes later. Hard work comes at the end of the semester when you see your final grades. Punishment, same thing. When the kids are older and they misbehave, it's, you wait. You just, the next time you do it, don't expect to be punished. Don't expect to be rewarded. Like if kids are late, my son was late one time coming home. So I called him and I was like, you just wait till you get home. I said, because, you're about to lose a whole lot of freedom, right? So obviously he's out, so I can't punish him immediately. But as soon as he gets home, he knew he was going to be punished. And then any type of apply what they call behavior analysis is when you're looking at the behavior, you're analyzing the behavior, and anything that you want to change is a modification. So once we analyze the behavior, we can introduce any sort of changes or modifications based on what we've seen and what we want. Observational learning, that's just modeling behavior. It is what it says it is. You're learning by observing what other people do. The theorist Albert Bandura talked about the social cognitive theory, the four processes of observational learning: attention, retention, reproduction, and then reinforcement. So with kiddos, at least, you know, that's kind of the way the classroom is designed to work for smaller kids. Attention, pay attention to what, pay attention to me. And then retention is, look, I'm going to show you how to do, simple addition problems. Now what I want you to do is I'm going to give you some addition problems and I want you to answer them. And then if you get them right, then yay, good for you. If you don't get them right, then here, let's help you work things out. So it's that constant give and take of pointing out when somebody does something that's not right and helping them to change it. And of course, easier said than done, but you want, especially with kids when they're little, you don't want to over exaggerate the bad. You really don't want to over exaggerate the good either. But you want to make a distinct difference between when something is good and desired and when something is not desired, because your reaction is that reinforcement. What you do in reaction to whatever it is they've done is that reinforcement. So with my youngest, I've learned that I have to be pretty monotone even when I'm angry, because if I show her that I'm angry, then we have a nuclear meltdown and it's just tough to come back from. So we have to, we have to be very careful in how we issue that reinforcement. And then here we'll finish up with different factors in learning. Now, learning styles. There's different types of learning styles. There's the visual learner. Okay, so basically the visual learner would be me just putting up the PowerPoint slides and you reading them and you understanding them and you retaining that information. Oral is hearing it. You don't need to see the PowerPoint slides. You can just listen to me lecture and you're going to be able to pick up everything. The kinesthetic learner, however, combines two, which is how I learn best, which is why I teach the way I do, because one, it gives you something to kind of associate with, and then it helps input the information different ways. So you're inputting the information by seeing it. You're also putting in the information by hearing it. And then by the combination of the two, it actually adds another source of input. So you're combining things. So the more often you input things, or the more ways you put the same information in, the more apt one is to remember it again, which is why I teach the way I do. However, the research suggests that there's no actual advantage to instruction within one's preferred style. I want to disagree with that a little bit, because I personally, for me anyway, I know sometimes I find that if I'm just reading something, it doesn't make sense. So I'm reading it, but sometimes when I speak it and I'm like, oh, that's what that means. Okay, I get it. Because my brain is processing it. Not only is it processing things visually, but it's processing things auditorily as well. If I'm just listening to something, I find that I wind up phasing out. I kind of drift off. Sitting in church for me sometimes is very difficult. The church we go to has beautiful, beautiful stained windows. So instead of listening what the pastor's trying to teach me, I'm looking at the windows going, wow, how pretty is that? Right. So, when I have the opportunity to connect visually with what's going on auditorily, sometimes I figure out, or, most of the time, I'm more apt to remember the information. So again, that's why I teach the way I do, um, because if you're an auditory learner, then you don't have to pay attention to the slides. You can just listen. If you're a visual learner, you've got the slides when you leave class. But if you're the kinesthetic type, you've got the lecture going on with the PowerPoint presentation, and that tends to help, more times than not. So it is what it is, and you just have to understand your learning style and play to your strengths. I do think there's an advantage with one's preferred style. There's a reason we prefer it. We sometimes prefer it because it's easier, right? So, but if something is not introduced to you in the way you want it or need it, you have the ability to go back afterward and make it what you need it to be, right? Sweet. All right, so that's the end of chapter 6 in learning. So if you guys need anything, let me know, okay? Otherwise, you guys stay safe, stay well. If you need me, email me. Comments, questions, or concerns, I'm always here. So you guys take care, and I will see you next time. Bye, guys.